my pleasure to introduce our very special guest, Deb Rogers. She has been an award-winning blogger, a statewide policymaker, and a nationally recognized victim advocate. As a freelance writer and business development consultant, she has produced many cool projects, including the national expansion of the Listen to Your Mother show, storytelling series, and a pop culture vertical for Blog Her. Originally from the Midwest, Deb's first job was cleaning ashtrays underneath the St. Louis Gateway Arch, but she soon after moved to Florida and never looked back. She's traveled from Pensacola to Key West, improving the state's response to violent crime, spent 5 years in the woods as a wilderness school teacher in Crescent City, and now happily lives and writes in St. Augustine because it offers the perfect blend of dazzling Atlantic Ocean seascapes, well-worn cobblestone roads, and wildly haunted buildings and palm hammocks. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Deb Rogers.
Thank you so much. I apologize for my voice. I've been talking about books too much between Library Week and Independent Bookseller Day, but I'll do my best, and I appreciate you bearing with. I really appreciate you being here. Spend time talking about books today. I'm going to read a little bit from Florida Woman that's just coming out in paperback next week. It's been out in hardcover since this summer. I've had so much fun meeting people across the state with it and across the country. It's been a really cool time for me to be a late blooming author. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and some of the puzzles that I had to solve and obsessions that it covers. And I'm going to make time for your questions and make this be what you'd like it to be. I'm also hoping I get a few confessions, because one of the best things about talking to book clubs or book groups has been I've heard from actual Florida women about things they've gotten away with. If there's anything that you feel you need to confess, we'll make time for that too. So I'll start by reading a little bit from the book just to give you an idea. It would have been so easy to snatch the keychain from Sari's neck, break the lock on the macaque's enclosure, and follow the monkeys as they run wild into the palmetto woods. I wasn't supposed to have thoughts like that. Well, touring the refuge on my first day, I was supposed to be respectfully delighted at the large troop of rescued monkeys, a devoted nonprofit staff, a remote haven of virgin wilderness on the edge of the Ocala National Forest. I was expected to feel grateful to Sari and to the others for allowing me to dedicate myself to a summer of service and personal transformation, as Cole Calhoun, my house arrest officer, had put it. Any decent person would have been offering baskets of shiny apples and spinning barrels of straw into gold in return for this live-in community service placement from which to pay her societal debts and to earn a second chance. At the very least, I should be smiling. So that's how we enter the world of Alice, which is the environment that Jamie finds herself in. The book concerns someone who commits one of those viral crimes that your neighbors in the north probably tell you about, the Florida men or Florida women who go viral after getting in trouble for a colorful crime, often involving animals or outlandish behavior, as a way of making fun of Florida and of people at the same time, some of which we own and some of which we don't. My character Jamie has that experience, falls into a crime that she didn't mean to commit, and as her version of what happened. It goes viral. She has no means. She's stuck trying to figure that out, and ends up being offered what she thinks is a panacea, a community service placement in the woods near the Silver Springs area or Crescent City that you might be familiar with because of where you are here. But it's a live-in placement, and it's rough conditions, no air conditioning, no indoor plumbing, and there are people there who are trying to form a refuge to rescue monkeys, exotic monkeys that are in trouble. Their troops have abandoned them, or they've been a part of the animal trade, which, as you know, is a big problem in Florida. And you know these sanctuaries exist. I know you have a very good one here in your community. There are some that are not as well respected in other parts of the state. So she ends up at this community and needs to fit in, needs to find work, and just really needs to do her time and figure out what she's going to do when she leaves. So she ends up meeting the characters who run this refuge, and they are there for their own mixed up reasons. The owner of the property is trying to figure out a way to keep it from being developed without selling it. And she's always trying to figure out a new scheme to keep her land and make some money. And the monkeys have entered and sort of her way of trying to save the day. She's also kind of creates spirituality as she goes along. She's someone who's always seeking and looking for a meaning, assigning meaning to things, weaving together different religions, and sort of has woven these monkeys into her own sort of religion. Maybe people who kind of wish, the song "Everyone wishes they could everyone wants to rule the world." Well, there's I'm kind of thinking lately everyone wants to run a cult. So she sort of wishes she could run a cult and be a leader. She's having trouble getting people on board, but she does have some folks who are gathered with her and stay on the property with her in various forms. And one is a vet who represents another type of person in Florida. So Sari represents someone who's trying to keep land from developers. And then another character is someone who's come to Florida to recreate herself. And it's not quite clear at the beginning if that's because she's been in trouble or what she needs to be recreating herself from. Another thing we're pretty familiar with here in Florida. And then there's another character who sort of runs the kitchen and is a service-oriented person, and she sort of gathers volunteers to do the work of this refuge, which is very common in nonprofits, as you know, really sort of making use of people's gifts of service is such an important thing that has to be done very well, or can turn a little toxic if it's done in ways that take advantage. So Atlas kind of grapples with that, and Jamie is trying to figure out the situation, how to fit in, how to live in the woods with these folks. And she ends up really falling into an excitement to be there, although it's kind of up to her to figure out, are they just love bombing her? Are they manipulating her? Is this for real? Is this a good opportunity? And what is actually going on? What is going on with the animals there? What is going on with the women? And what are their designs for her? And during this time, she's also grappling with the issues of her past. She's been through a series of abandonments and has no way to recreate herself because she has no money. And I think that's something that we can relate to, especially in Florida. It does take means or a community or both in order to start over. So that's the predicament she finds herself in. She finds herself developing relationships with the monkeys, with the women, against the women, and a lot of crazy things happen for her to try to figure out. And I constructed the book with two different points of view in order to sort of give readers an idea of what might be going on at Atlas. So some of it is told from Jamie's point of view, and some of it is told in the form of Google Docs that we see the women writing as a group project, trying to write this website for the new Atlas they envision. And we sort of see them, I don't know if you've worked on a group project lately, but it can turn a little creative when people are not all on the same page. Who we really are can come through even as we edit each other or try to shape each other's visions, or are disappointed that someone is not meeting ours. So that was a really fun puzzle for me to work with, was how do I show the reader what's really going on at Atlas that Jamie's not noticing? How do I show the relationship of these people while also having her point of view? And how do I add a little fun? It's really fun when you look at how do people work together or don't work well together, and sort of try to create a project, in their case, a website that recreates who they are and will save the day for them. So I think that's sort of the grounding line throughout the book. And in order to, I think what a writer does when they're writing that story or fleshing out the plot is indulge some of their obsessions. So many of my obsessions do show through in the book, and a lot of that does have to do with the setting of Florida. Like, I'm obsessed with how our setting affects how we live, what we do to stay here, what we do to stay here against all odds, including increasingly extreme weather, and maybe folks up north who don't understand why we want to live here, why we want to buy property here, if we even can, how to hold on to that, how to work with others to do so, what our history with our property is, who's lived here before us, who's had trouble developing it, who's done well developing it, what that has meant for Florida. Has such a role in the public imagination as a destination for entertainment, as a destination that's sort of our nation's exotic wilderness with our wild animals and our not so wild animals and our exotic trade animals. Our climate does allow us to live outside with each other or in front of each other in different ways, which does lead to some of our wild Florida headlines. Some of our alligators, snakes, and monkeys do lead to some of those headlines. The other thing that leads to those headlines is our very broad public sunshine laws, where Florida is very transparent with the news resources about what happens. Other states aren't as transparent with bookings and mug sheets. So that's how Florida crimes became so viral, is they could be ascertained, gathered, and shared with the world in colorful ways. So I'm obsessed with all those issues and what it means to live here, what it means to be from here, and what it means to come here. I think sometimes people move increasingly south to recreate themselves, and then what do you do now? You're here. So there's something about leaving one's family in order to vacation here or snowbird here or recreate themselves here. And there's definitely something about our Springs area that's very old and very interesting and very spiritual and very challenging to try to keep the land from reclaiming your home and from entering into whatever it is you're relating with. So that's definitely something that has obsessed me. How people get together and live together and create something is endlessly fascinating to me. So it was fun to create a book that had a closed environment, even though it's outside and wild and on acres, to a small group of people. And how do they interact with each other? How do they create a found family in good ways and in toxic ways? How do they defend each other against what they think are the outside forces that could topple everything? There's a lot of good, juicy stuff in that. There's a lot of comedy in that too. I think the way that we interact with each other can often be really, really funny. And how we reinforce, normalize, and create patterns and habits with each other. One thing that was really fun to me to look at was how do people sort of create a cult, whether it's of two in a marriage or of three in a group or of more in a company or a church or a small nonprofit or on a grand scale. And I think things that are a little bit culty are happening all around us, whether it's MLMs or organized groups or just someone who's like, and I really want everyone to see it my way. And here's what it would take for you to see it my way. And the ways that people affect that, whether it's manipulation, psychological manipulation, compelling behavior, love bombing, it's pretty fascinating when you start to look at how do people exact that kind of intrusion into other people's thinking spaces. So this gave me kind of a playground to see some of that happening. And that I think that's really rampant in nonprofits or in places where people work for other reasons than normal exchanges, where people are hoping for connection or hoping for service. It's just a vulnerability that we have and one that can be really expanded on. So I take it to some extremes in order to play around with that. And I also get to indulge other obsessions I have, including, I don't know about you, but when things get tough, I often fantasize about running away to a cabin with a few friends and just like blocking everything else out and starting over. We will have a garden, we will have a goat, we will just not, we will turn off our phones or leave them behind and start over. And I've heard that fantasy a lot in the last few years. Life has gotten so complex, and so challenging in many ways. It's normal for us to want to find people we feel safe with and like-minded, and maybe experiment with something else. And that's been going on, forever. It's definitely gone on in this country and in the States specifically since, the 60s. There was a big movement of that, and there's a resurgence of that. The statistics show that there's a resurgence of thoughts and feelings like that. Have we had many good examples of it? I don't know. Maybe they keep that under wraps. They don't want us to know the good examples. We definitely have some bad examples. I mean, I've lived through some bad examples of it. And things always sound much better in your head before you try to actually manifest them. So I get to have fun with that as well. So I think those are some of the obsessions that guided me through playing with Florida women. And then lastly, and there have been a lot of really cool books about this topic that have come out recently, I am fascinated with what animals can be to us, what they can be for our mental health, what they can be for our connection in the world, what they can be about understanding a different way of relating to each other, or just relating to the animals themselves, how they can be true friends to us, and how maybe we're in service to them when we think that they're our pets, maybe really we're their pets. So I definitely enjoyed exploring that. There have been some really good books about animal intelligence and animal communities that have come out. Recently read Remarkably Shiny Things. Is that the right title? About an octopus. It was a really, really beautiful book. There have been Annie Hartnett's recent book, Animal Farm, is so good. There's just so many books that have explored that lately. I feel like there's something in the wind about that as we're increasingly concerned or frustrated with our fellow men and women, animals are becoming a source of leadership or guidance or just plain friendship. So B is a monkey, a macaque, who's an actual character in the book. There's actually 45 monkeys, all of which originally had names, but then my editor said that's too many names. You can't name them all and keep them straight. So they all are different though in my mind when I edited. But there's about a dozen now that are named characters, but there's really only a few primary monkey characters. B is a primary monkey character, and her friendship with Jamie is instructive to Jamie, and that's a through line in the book. And that is an important part of my life as well, whether that's with wild animals or with connecting with a pet dog. Important part of my life is the solace and the connection that we receive from animals. So I think those are my major obsessions that I got to play with. I think that's the most fun about writing. I don't know how many of you might also be writers, but and reading is we get to really go deep into some things and we don't sometimes even know why. Why does that thing interest me? But reading about it or writing about it is a way into figuring that all out. So I think those are the main things that guided me through writing Florida Woman, and I had a lot of fun writing it, never really thinking I'd be published for several reasons. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And one is that I'm just a Florida woman, I'm just an unconnected woman in Florida who's been a single mother and worked hard and never really had time to do writing workshops. So I have an MFA, I have zero connections. I live in rural Florida. My perception of publishing was not that I would have a chance to do that or find an agent. How are you supposed to do that? So I've written for many years for myself. I hadn't finished many things. Like I said, single mother, not very busy, never. Plus, just not. It's hard to finish a book, and if you're not going to do anything with it, it's easier to quit. But then a few years ago, I finished a book through the NaNoWriMo project. I was talking about that earlier, and finishing that book was really radically powerful for me. It was like, well, I finished something. It's whole and it's done, and it really could be fixed now. I might not know how to fix it, but it's a whole thing. And I got to have that fun process of seeing there's a magic in finishing things where you see that you laid the groundwork for the end at the beginning without knowing it, and things start happening on their own. It's almost like a creative fugue you get into, and a lot of other real treasures happen if you finish something. And something changes in your brain that you can finish things. I don't know, some of it is magical. So that really changed my process and changed my relationship with my writing. So that when I started Florida Woman, which is really the book I think my heart wanted to write for the reasons I talked about, it was just asking to be written too. It was like I could get away from it. That part came more easily. It was more easy to finish it, and I knew I could finish it. And when I hit blocks, I was able to say, well, that's just now. I will be able to finish it. Revised it and had enough. I don't know why. I figured, why not see if it's publishable? Why not find out? Because I got some feedback from a writer's group that said I should try. I really didn't have a lot of confidence though. I was 55, I'm past even the 40 over 40, I'm way over 40. I'm just not your typical publishing type story that I felt they were looking for. I didn't have a book series to offer. I didn't have a lot of the things that I would have thought they would offer. So I guess I'm just a testament to say, it's just really never too late to do what it is that you think you might like to do. Things have shifted somewhat, and things are possible. Some of the things that worked sort of to my benefit is publishing changed a little bit because of COVID. They work less. They work more from home and less going to events and workshops and things where they would sign people. So I was able to find an amazing agent who really supported me and found me the perfect editor who's from North Carolina and understood Southern folks and Southern preoccupations and obsessions, and didn't mind reading about snakes crawling across your bed, and all sorts of things that are part of dealing with a book set in the Florida wilderness. So I've been really lucky to have a big 5 publisher take me on. And I just always want to share that if there's anything that you are feeling like you can do in the second stage of your retirement, or after your kids launch, or just as your life, whatever it is in your life that's been holding you back, I really feel like everything's possible. And I've been really lucky and enjoying sharing that message with folks. So those are sort of, and so that's where the book is at now. It's been out for a year. It's coming out in paperback now, which, that's great because people can throw that in their beach bags or take it on a cruise ship or, leave it behind in a hotel room. And it's not as hard as a hardcover, but so that's really, really fun coming up now. So I think that's sort of I don't have anything to announce yet, but my next book, I would share my preoccupations with that included The Fountain of Youth. So if that's anything that has preoccupied you, or the prevalence of UFO sightings in Florida, or any of those, or the way that people mysteriously disappear on boats. If any of those things obsess you, keep an eye out for, and aquatic sea life, of course. So if those things obsess you, keep your eye out for that down the road. But I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or hear any confessions you might have.
How did you find your agent?
I found my agent on Twitter. So I broke every rule. I didn't, if you're an aspiring writer, there's a lot of advice out there. I can't say that I have ever received any good advice from traditional channels. There's a lot of people who tell you exactly how to write a query letter, that it has a formula and it needs to have point A, point B, point C, and here's a list of people to apply to. I've happened to find, another thing I was obsessed with for a while. Do you remember the story of Zola, the woman who came down, unless you were on Twitter a lot, 5 or 6 years ago, you might not know, but a movie came out about this. She came down as a stripper down to Tampa to and sort of had a wild adventure in Florida and wrote about it on Twitter, and that went viral. And I was sort of tracking that story because to me it just was emblematic of someone coming down to Florida and making a lot of money and having this public imagination about what Florida did. They love to hate us, but they also love to come here and love us. It's just so complex and interesting to me. So I was reading what people were saying about that, and someone said something really smart and funny, and I noticed she was an agent, and I'm like, okay. And I looked into who she was. I'm like, wow, she's really cool. I don't know that she's going to be interested in me, but I just love what she said about that Florida story. And so I just wrote her. I said all the wrong things. I did not follow any. It was just myself, Just like, I'm just a Florida dirtbag lady, but I got a novel. About this? Would you like to see it? Let me know. But more importantly, I want to know about this and this that you said in your tweet. And she said, sure, I'll read it. I was sure she was just indulging me, but she signed me. We took it from there. She helped me with a revision. And the whole agency helped me with preparing it to go out. And then we went out to auction. And then I thought, well, no way. But wow, I was thrilled at that point to have that experience. I had a book go to auction. That was a celebration to me. But she found me the right editor to buy it, and that was a very exciting day. Mm-hmm. So I think just be yourself is my answer. It's hard, but I think they get a lot of the formula. What you have is to be different is really what they're looking for, I think.
Out of all the stories you researched for Florida Women, do you have one that really stuck out to you as, really Florida woman, or do you have a favorite article that you found?
Oh, that's a good question. Like actual mugshot stories?
Sure, yeah.
Well, my favorite stories definitely do involve animals. And the theft of wild animals, like when someone tries to steal a cassowary from a zoo, or is caught smuggling birds on airplanes. I love those, and people know to send me those. So those are some of my favorites. There's a pelican involved in Jamie's story because, to me, I think those are the stories that capture people's imagination the most. Like, how in the world have you roped an animal into being your complicit in this crime somehow? I did enjoy reading quite a bit about Carol Baskin and sanctuary crimes as well. I visited many sanctuaries where there are good ones and there are not good ones, and I don't want to name any, but I will say that Joe Exotic did read and blurb my book and said that it's right on. So of course those stories that have to do with sanctuary crimes or trafficking animal crimes are definitely my favorites. I don't love the ones that are clearly someone just suffering with mental illness or drug abuse and, living their life out, getting caught in that situation. To me, that's not fun, but that is an important part of why crimes go viral and why people perceive them the way they do. But my favorites do also involve golf carts, stolen golf carts, like someone wilding on a golf cart. That's like, go girl, go girl. Stick it to the man, go out there.
What life, what did you go through? I was fascinated by the way you talked about the relationships melding together. I thought, so what have you done in your life that gave you the insight into creating different characters and bringing them into interacting?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a great question to ask any writer. And you could ask any writer's family members and they'll tell you a different story, because I've heard different family members think different characters were about them, the same characters, Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of themes of connection and estrangement in my characters and their drive to find connection and community because of that estrangement. And I think there's definitely been a lot of estrangement in my family of origin, and that has affected my life choices as well as the characters in the book. I've worked for a number of nonprofits in the victims' rights community, the same as sanctuaries, many of which are good, many of which have difficult relationships with each other because people come to them who might not quite be healed or might have different agendas and have all odds against them. And so you'll see a lot of that kind of push-pull that I play with in there. I have lived in the woods with a group of people that'll bring an alternative school. It was meant to challenge children. It challenged all of us who worked there just as much or perhaps more. So I think that anytime you try to live in community with anyone, even if it's just for a weekend, I recently went to a beach house with a group of friends, and the dynamics of just deciding who got the queen size bed and who got the kids' bunk bed was fascinating, right? Like, how do you work that out? And did so-and-so bring enough drinks when she said she was gonna bring drinks? And then someone who overcompensated and did way too much, and you'll never be able to pay her back for all that she did, and clean the whole time. It's like everyone brings so much to every group. That was just a week-long weekend. We bring so much to all that we do. So I think those are some of the key places in my life where, and I think it's also interesting, I come from a working class background where I think more is said overtly about things. But then I was the first in my family to go to college and to work in settings that were working class. So I kind of straddle those worlds back and forth. I never quite fit in either I have to code switch just to pass in both areas. And it's interesting. I think it makes you see how people work things out really differently depending on everything, including class and including where we find ourselves and including just, bottom line too, there's some people who manipulate others and some who are vulnerable to it. So I've definitely probably been on both sides of it, but only recognize the times when I've been manipulated, probably, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say that it was probably about 50 years ago when I was living in New York and going to school in the city that I had a part-time job for a realty company, LTA Realty, and I'll never forget it. And we were trying to sell land in Silver Spring Shores. And I had like a little spiel that I had to read. My name wasn't my name. I was like Ann Pace. And we were inviting people to come to a dinner.
Oh my gosh.
And then those people, like in other words, we had to get them to the dinner, and then they would go ahead and try and sell them land in Silver Spring Shores, and that was like 50 years ago.
Wow.
Which is something, but I was just gonna say, for me, I've been here for 47 years, and I think it's like really interesting because we forget how this was. In other words, people that are newly here, it's like Ibis isn't Ibis, there was an alligator farm
Right.
or something like that. But I remember going, the minute you said the thing about the monkeys, I do remember going on some kind of, I think we went to see the manatees or something. We went to Homosassa.
Yeah.
Could it have been Homosassa Springs?
Yes.
My geography is terrible. But I do remember the story on the boat about the people that came to entertain, it was the monkeys that were there, and it was called Monkey Island or something like that. But we forget how they were all here before we were, and even now when they're pulling apart these areas for development, the coyotes are coming out. I see bunnies all the time. I've lived here for 47 years. I never saw a bunny in my yard. So it's right? Or I'll see on next door that some snake is on somebody's driveway. I've been here for 47 years. I never had, it's just really amazing how things are changing,
And existing, right? And that is some of the research that I read. So one of the things about those animals who've just been living in this area that's just now being, and even more so north of here, really hitting clear cutting to the level you guys have had more of. There's tons of wildlife in there, but some of them aren't going to react well with others. And the problem with these specific macaques is they carry a virus. Some of them can carry a virus that is not harmful to each other, but is to us. And so, what are we going to do? Are we comfortable with, extreme methods? Are we going to build more shelters? The research, the science around it is super fascinating. And that could happen from development, that could happen from a severe weather event, and I've recently visited the Fort Myers as part of their book festival, and they've had a really hard time recovering from a hurricane. We've taken for granted that hurricane recovery will be a somewhat responsive timeline. I know many people struggled in many different times, but all bets are off now, especially more so. There's just more of us here, and is recovery ready? Is it ready to handle what might be revealed in the woods? It's hard to say.
I also wanted to say I'm not a great reader. I have like adult attention deficit disorder, so for me to read a book, you gotta really catch me. So I just want to say I love it.
Oh,
I'm
thanks for
only
giving
like
it a
this much
try.
through, but it really is just the dynamics. I just can't put it down. I really, really am enjoying it.
Oh, that means a lot to me. Thanks for giving it a try.
Yeah, I love it. And it's kind of funny about to me it seems like my sister has a friend who's kind of like a hippie named Sari. And so I just think it's kind of funny because I keep on saying, that they do these like drum circles and they like the living off the land and growing their own, like I'm just saying it's like that whole atmosphere, of like, group hug, or I just think it's kind of like, it's going back to, a time where everybody tries to love one another. Which is what we need now.
Yes. We're maybe craving it. Maybe we're craving it. Maybe we just don't know how to do it right. That's part of what I take a look at. Like, just because people have ideas doesn't mean they're good, but it also doesn't mean they're bad. And a lot of people can have good ideas, but just have no way of knowing how to pull it off. And some people just, whatever they touch, it turns a little crazy. So I love playing with all that.
I have a question. When you talked about revisions, you wrote the book and then it went to a publisher or to an editor first or something?
First, my agent gave me notes for revision, and then
So notes for revision, is it just like grammatical stuff, or do they want you to move a section of the book, or do they say is it calling you baby ugly, or what are they? Are you insulted by that too? Do you feel like I wrote this is what I want it to be, and
I was grateful for it. I've been alone with my stuff for so long. I was so grateful for smart editing. I think it's harder in writing groups when you're not sure, if it's great advice to take that feedback. I should say for me it has been. In writing groups you're like, well, is that really good feedback or not? I'm not sure how to discern. And it does sting. Of course it stings because it's it's almost like a hole and people are chipping at it. No, it was all of the above. More so thematic, too many characters. Like at one point, my agent asked me to consider collapsing 2 characters into one. That it would be better to know a few characters better than to have more. So that could be a big change.
Taking a lot of time to rewrite.
Oh yeah, incredible amount of time. And in fact, I wish I had rewritten. It can take like up to a month for a rewrite. And I wish I had rewritten it one time more before sending it out, because I kind of knew I wanted to, but I was excited. You also reach a point where you just can't look at it again.
That's right.
Yeah, so you probably need one past that, like one past. So I'm trying to take my time with this one and put it aside and then revisit it again. Editing is, I find, really hard, but with good notes, it's almost like doing a puzzle. And then these are smart people who just want to help you succeed, so it's worth it to take it in. You get attached, and that's why that phrase, kill your darlings, is so true. I really felt like I was killing my darlings when they made me take names away from them. But characters too, but they were right. Everything was right. There's only one thing I kind of regret not fighting for. It was one character's backstory. I just love it so much. And I had done a lot of research too. But they were right. It was slowing it down. And I was indulging an obsession. It wasn't in service to the story. So I think that's what revision really, really taught me is is this in service to the story?
That's another book.
That might be another book. Yeah, it's not going away. It's not going away. Good point. That's a good point. But that's a good question. Every revision is hard. It's just going to be hard.
So how long did it take you to write this one?
I mean, it took me about 5 years. That sounds like a long time, doesn't it? I know, and writers are expected to pump out these books so fast, and I don't know how. I think that there's a lot of different kinds of books, maybe. I'm just not going to be that kind of writer, and that's hard. That's why I didn't know if they'd be interested in someone my age, because if it takes me 5 years. Sorry, guys. Hopefully this one won't take 5.
This one was such a hit.
Hopefully it won't, and hopefully it won't take me 5, because I did, you do have things that you do want to bring forward. I don't know if we can even focus on that though, because the process is really the magic. It really is. Oh, and then there's another kind of magic that I wouldn't have known if I didn't finish. But things start to come true that you've written. I swear on this. Ask other writers about it, and they'll tell you, because I've been asking people. There are things that I've written that were complete fiction, and then they've come true. So, I mean, I gotta keep writing. But it kind of slows you down, because you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to write a fire. But I definitely don't want to write a serial killer.
So what did you write that came true?
I can't say, but yeah, it's spooky. Spooky.
So you said you took a lot of inspiration from cults and MLMs. Is there a specific cult or MLM you researched specifically?
I mean, I researched a lot just because I love it. I really am fascinated by Teal Swan. She's a terrifying cult leader, and what she's done to manipulate people to psychologically give their will over to her and for her own reasons. I've researched a number of MLMs, including LuLaRoe and some of the smaller ones, because I think they were very effective at getting people to buy in, and that in order to write the website, like they all think they need a really good literature. So I researched them, and I think that that's really telling. Some of the Back to the Land cults of the 70s are fascinating to me. The Farm in Tennessee is a very good one. Really good work about midwives came out of the work that they did there. A beautiful book about midwifery. But also when you read some of the testimony of the children that were raised in these settings that the adults felt were idyllic, you see a different side of it. So I really have been interested in the 70s and 80s and some of those intentional living situations that were really more like cults. I didn't research as much for this book, but I have researched the Children of God and the other more religious ones, but I didn't want to get into that. I do love the neo-hippie movement that has been happening. You see it on TikTok. Sometimes they call it cottagecore, sometimes they call it other things. Crystals are back in a big way, all that stuff from the 70s, that neo-paganism, it's back. And it's interesting that sometimes people will do a lot of research and meaning and look for teachers, and some people will just do it their own way. It's like, okay, we all can do that now. And that's fine and good, and that might have meaning to you, but what if you start trying to convince other people and ascribe things to that? And I'm definitely looked at the way that many of the different cults try to make money, because that's always where it gets a little messy. It's one thing to have an ideology that you want other people to join in and do. But the thing with intentional living situations and or cults is two things. Everyone still has to get fed, and bills have to be paid. There's just a regular life has to happen, and money is needed. You need money for all the things, and if they have grandiose ideas about growing, even more money is needed, and that's often where they go awry. And that's very interesting to me about cults in capitalism. It's like we have to figure out, we have these great ideas, and maybe monkeys are sacred, and maybe we want to do this with them, or maybe we want to make sacrifices, or maybe we want to have this type of drum circle. But we also need money to pay the gas bill. So who's going to do what, and who's willing to do what? for that.
When you sit down and read, what author do you like to read?
Oh, I like to read. I read a lot of new fiction. I love fiction that's recently out. Because I like to see what people are talking about and it's interesting to them. I do like some crime fiction. That's a good question. I'm very interested in audiobooks lately. I've been pretty obsessed with being able to just listen and do my regular work while reading. So those are good. I like a lot of the older books, rediscovering some of the older books. I've been rereading Clarice Lispector, and that's been my new obsession. I recently reread some Shirley Jackson, and so some of the older books too. But I've had fun with new fiction. I'm kind of interested in what is publishing doing right now.
It's very hard to come up with some new ideas too, a lot of times, something that hasn't been done before, and right?
I guess so, and I think that's why we should be encouraged, living outside of New York, because I've heard from several booksellers that people are tired of the same old thing. So if you have a different story or something, different and out of the publishing goes in trends. I don't really like to read like domestic mysteries or marriages. That to me is boring. So, and I think that's been very popular and been out a lot. So, and I'm not really a fantasy reader. I don't know why. It's not my thing, the genre reader. But publishing is looking for some different ways to go, and booksellers tell me that people are looking for something different.
Are they pestering you to come up with number two?
Let's hope so. No confessions. Oh my gosh. Jupiter. That's smart. Keep it tight. Keep a low profile. I love that about Jupiter overall. I was saying earlier that you guys do a great job of staying a little bit under the radar. Like, people know you, people know you're great, but you also try to stay under the radar, and that's smart. That's a good play. I admire that.
But sometimes I think that it's the Northerners that come to, that we're not really quite, it's kind of like, maybe that's why we're under the radar, is that we have like a Northern, or, you being from the Midwest, whatever it is, you bring that to the area that you come to too.
That's true. That is true. That's sort of divided a little bit in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is that maybe we go under that radar because we're, transplanted here,
Smart.
Yeah.
Well, it's true, really smart. I really appreciate you inviting me out here today. This has been a delight, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions. You can find me on my website. I don't hang on Twitter that much anymore, but you can find me on Instagram if any of you guys are there. Deb on the office. And then we can just stay in touch. Yeah.